All right, we'll start now. So, hello everyone. This is the fifth session of our course on fascism, hosted by ISA IMS. Today we have here with us Anupam Guha. He's the faculty at Center for Policy Studies at IIT Bombay. He's also the founder of and convener of Kosambi Circle, which is a study and analysis circle of socialist texts, which has been conducting studies and analysis of various socialist texts for some time now and entertains discussions from across tendencies within socialism. He's going to talk about fascists in their own words. That is the title of our talk today. So, welcome, Anupam.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right.
If
Tell me
it's
whenever
okay
I
with you,
can.
could you turn on your camera?
Oh, sure.
All right.
Am I visible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Um, so yeah, do tell me whenever I can start, and I can. At
Please
that.
start.
All right.
You can. Yeah.
Hello, people. Lal Salam, comrades. I was invited to this thing by Surya Shekhar, who told me that you guys are doing a series on fascism. And I got interested because fascism is something I'm quite obsessed with. And what I have noticed is that while there is a significant amount of discussion in left spaces when it comes to what fascism is, that is to say, theorizing what fascism is, as well as the history of fascism. These are two topics which people do cover. I mean, not perhaps in the depth I would like, but these are things that do exist. And I see that in the previous iterations of this program, you all have gone through some of such work. Like you have gone through Paxton's book, which I think is a very important introductory text, and perhaps the first time somebody attempted to completely take out fascism from theory and try to historicize it, which I think is an excellent effort. But I'm not going to talk about that. uh, I do not uh, intend to talk about a theories of fascism. I would allude to existing theories. I would use them, uh, perhaps critique them, but I'm not going to present to you a new theory of fascism. Neither am I going to present to you, a new history of fascism. I believe that enough literature on that already exists, although I might allude to some of that history. What I wish to do specifically, and what I hope you find interesting, is fascists in their own words, or rather, the self description of the fascist movement historically. What is it that fascists have said and done? How do fascists look at the world? How do they understand reality? And what they plan to do about that reality? So, my name is Anupam. Just a few minutes of who am I. And I think that in any political conversation of the sort we are having, it's important that people are clear about the names and the politics of people involved. So I am Anupam. The person who introduced me kindly told you a bit about me. I'm a professor at Center for Policy Studies at IIT Bombay, but this talk has nothing to do with my day job. I'm also somebody who is, for many years, involved um, in one way or another with Marxist theory and organization. For the last 2.5 years, my primary thing is study circle, whose name you might have heard, Kaushambi Study Circle. It's a socialist theory reading and analysis circle. People from various tendencies are welcome to join. In fact, you don't need to be a socialist to join, because a lot of people join Kaushambi to first understand what socialism is. I think that is also something that is important, pedagogy, and that is what Kaushambi does. So that is me and my politics. Very specifically speaking, I am somebody who um, is deeply sympathetic to the ideas and analysis of Marx and Rosa Luxemburg. Uh, I have, and there's not much more to say. whatever is relevant to today's talk is there. Secondly, I have told you that I'm not going to try to redefine fascism for you, but I am more interested in this talk to explain how fascists view themselves, their ideas and actions across time and geography. Why is that a useful exercise? Why do you care about what fascists think about yourself? Well, first of all, it is politically useful to know what people think about themselves, especially if they are politically a powerful force. And it would be silly to, ignore fascists. In this sense, I oppose a lot of communists who say things like fascists are a cat's paw of capitalism, and hence it does not matter what they think about themselves or how they present themselves. I disagree with this. In general, in today's talk, what is going to come out is that I strongly disagree with the idea of fascism being merely capitalism in decay, which is something a lot of our comrades do think, and I very strongly disagree with that. Fascism is its own uh, vehicle. It has agency, it has an ideology, and that ideology in very specific and concrete ways translates to a very specific and concrete kind of politics. So it is important for a socialist or a communist to be aware of what fascists think they are and how fascists look at the world. Also, in general, I am very much against the overuse of the word fascism, or what I call the Jason Stanley school of analysis, where everything you don't like is fascist, every authoritarian is a fascist, every reactionary is a fascist, right? We do not want to do that here. That is a bad analysis, and also that is bad politics, because that does not lead to good understanding of what is going on. And in order to do anything useful, you first need to understand what is going on. So let us start with fascism. Let us start with where does it come from. And I'm going to take you a little uh, in the past, before the names you are all familiar with come into the picture. And we are going to go to an era which in France was called, now my French is atrocious, so if you can speak French, I think you can pronounce it better. But it's something called fin de siècle, Findesiecele. And in French, it means the end of an era, or an end of current times, or an end of a century. What was going on was that while the 19th century slowly transitioned to the 20th, there was a lot of um, um, crisis of economics, crisis of culture. Sorry, did I say 19th to 20th? Oh, my apologies. 20th to 21st. I always get this wrong. Um, there were a lot of crises going on in Europe, and there was a feeling of both despondency and revolution. And of course you would know this, because this is the same era out of which the second international stuff happens, and out of which people like Lenin would come out. But we are not going to uh, jump into the way we look at history. Let us look at it from a slightly different point of view. You have a lot of social issues, and you have a sort of anxiety among a certain subsection of the highly paid working class, which we or the lower rungs of the capitalist class, right? This thing which we incorrectly often call the middle class. You have an anxiety, you have bad economics, you have war in the horizon. Out of this society, out of this despondency, this worry on war, on economics, and also a distrust of democracy, of liberal bourgeois democracy. And if all of this sounds familiar, it should, because you know we are sort of going through another such period where there is a widespread discontent about liberal democracy. A certain kind of thinking comes out of this, which says that society is degenerating. And society is degenerating because of a sort of a spiritual malaise. And in order to halt that, certain radical and revolutionary actions are required. Interestingly, this is not an idea which comes clean cut from the right wing. In fact, the origins of fascism, and again, like, I'm going to do this in a sort of thorough manner. So please do not, react emotionally when I say certain things. But the origins of fascism are actually connected to the left wing as well. One of the first philosophers of proto fascism is a French syndicalist, George Sorel. What is a syndicalist? Syndicalism is the French word for trade unionism. George Sorel starts out as an ordinary conservative, then he becomes a liberal, then he becomes a socialist, then he becomes a Marxist, then he becomes something between a Marxist and an anarchist trade unionist. But he's not happy with Marxism. George Sorel looks at the world around him and says that according to Marx, capitalism should have, collapsed on its head. I don't see that happening. And according to Marx, the base was the important thing. The economics would have, controlled the politics of Europe. And I don't see that happening. What I am seeing happening is that nationalism is becoming a larger and a larger force. I don't see huge crowds of workers taking power. What I do see is some very good organizers and politicians sort of leading the working class, not the working class leading itself. Sorel, in many ways, mischaracterizes and misunderstands Marx, but that is not the point. I could go into detail that Marx was never an economic determinist in the first place, or that Marx never said that the collapse of capitalism would be final, or that the collapse of capitalism would necessarily lead to socialism. Marx never thought or said many of those things. But unfortunately, a lot of people, including a lot of communists, think that Marx was a determinist, that Marx thought that economics is the primary thing, that Marx thought the fall of capitalism is decided and it would be replaced by socialism, etc. Even many communists think like that. So we can't completely, criticize Sorel for thinking that this is what Marx thought and said. But Sorel goes in a different direction. Sorel says that democracy is horrible. Marx is right about bourgeois democracy being bad. Look, it can be controlled by whoever owns the media, etc. Why not do away with democracy completely and have, the sort of thing Marx was saying about a dictatorship of the working class? But why even have a democracy in the working class in the first place? Let the working class be led by an animated, intelligent leading section. And to unify the working class, if they are not going to work according to their economic self-interest, if Marx is wrong about the economic parts of it, why can't we unite the working class using nationalism? Why can't we tell the poor that the decadent politicians are evil? Unite for the greatness of your nation. And then the working class would get united. This was Sorel's idea. Do you know who was Sorel's champion? Who was Sorel's ideal revolutionary? Lenin. Sorel was a fan of Lenin. Sorel wrote, this is exactly what we need. Leave aside this idea of working class leading itself. No, 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 no. We need a vanguard. And in fact, this whole class thing is useless. Why do the classes need to fight? As long as we all agree that capitalism is rotten and needs to be rejuvenated, not replaced or annihilated. Important. Then why can't we have a strong leadership leading the working class? Sorel was fascinated with Lenin. Then he got fascinated by another guy whose name you might have heard, Benito Mussolini. Let's move on from Sorel to Mussolini. Some of you have known about Mussolini. Some of you might have read Mussolini. But what is often forgotten in popular culture is that Mussolini starts out as a socialist. Not only is Mussolini a socialist, Mussolini is on the left wing of the Italian Socialist Party. In a sense, Mussolini is irritated by what he considers the degeneracy, weakness, electoralism, parliamentarism, reformism of the Italian socialists. Mussolini does not like reformism. Reformism is weak. And then something else happens which invokes the whole idea of weakness. The socialists start talking about internationalism and then say that Italy should not involve itself in African colonization in Libya. Why? Mussolini says the Italian working class is brave, it is heroic, it should go and create colonies, it should strive for greatness. Eventually, Mussolini completely publicly repudiates his Marxism. He's thrown out of the Socialist Party or leaves the Socialist Party, whatever you want to call it. But basically, he says the Socialist Party are a bunch of weak parliamentarian liberals, and a new ideology is needed to lead the working class. This new ideology will not be a stupid materialist ideology which Marx made. Because, of course, there is much more to reality than economics. Who cares about that? Rather, instead of having this class war between the workers and the capitalists, why can't the workers and the capitalists unite for building a great state? This is very interesting. Marx, whenever he uses the word socialism, uses it identically to communism. I hope you all are aware of that, right? Socialism and communism are the same thing when Marx is using the word. Marx's idea of a transitionary state is not really a state, and it's definitely not state capitalism. If you read the Critique of the Gotha program, Lenin changes a lot of that, right? Lenin says that before we have even small communism, we would need a period of state capitalism. Lenin is quite honest. He calls it state capitalism. He does not call it socialism. So US, like the Russian Soviet, it was not the USSR yet. So the Russian Soviet Republic, it was a state capitalist country according to Lenin. But still, in the April thesis, Lenin is very clear that this is a temporary state of affairs, that eventually we want to dismantle the army, dismantle the police, and dismantle the state. In fact, Lenin is thinking in terms of a few years before actual democracy happens and the councils of the workers are given power. Of course, that never happens. Lenin keeps tallowing it again and again and then dies, and then, well, a lot of stuff happens after that. But the point is, here Mussolini diverts. He says this idea of emancipation, of equality, is utter and complete nonsense. It's a liberal idea. And anybody who talks about democracy, any kind of democracy, parliamentary democracy or working class democracy, is a liberal. What is needed is a strong state, a centralized, strong state, which is going to uplift everybody, including the working class. And he calls this idea fascism. Comes from the idea of unity. There was a Roman symbol in which sticks were tied together to signify the old story. You know, one stick breaks, many sticks together stay strong. Mussolini takes that idea and says that instead of, if the classes are not fighting but are united under a strong centralized state, then everybody can get uplifted. That is the fundamental idea of fascism. Let me read to you the initial fascist manifesto. All right. So there are 25 points of fascism. I'm going to read them to you. Universal suffrage and lowering the voting age from 25 to 18. separate electorates based on region and identity and social like whatever specific protection somebody might need. Equality for women, so the women would be allowed to vote, something not in Italy till that point. Representation at government level of labor unions. So this is the new idea of Mussolini. Let's not have class war. Let us have the workers sit with the capitalists at the national level and plan the whole state together. This idea is called corporatism. Corporate whole. The state is not separate into various classes. Rather, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, under the watchful eyes of a strong state, unite to try to get maximum wealth for everybody. Abolition of aristocracy, formation of National Council for Labor, Industry, Transportation, Public Health and Communication, a minimum wage, reduction of the day to 8-hour work, participation of workers' representatives in industry commission, labor unions be represented, reorganization and nationalization of public sector and railways, revision of the draft laws, reduction of retirement age from 65 to 55, strong progressive tax on capitalists, seizure of all religious wealth and taxation on religious business, revision of contracts for military provision, and a peaceful but competitive foreign policy. Also, nationalization of armament factories. Tell me something honestly. If you had no knowledge of history at all, and this was the party manifesto, an election was tomorrow, would you vote for Mussolini? Honestly, raise your hand if you would vote for Mussolini. I would have. If this were the manifesto and if the competition were like, our political parties, I would have voted for him. And you would have as well. Many people would. But if you look very carefully, and if you have read the critique of the Gotha program, and as soon as you see things like public education, public welfare, minimum wage, there are certain questions which you need to think. And when you don't think those certain questions, there is a problem. And we will talk about that later when we talk. But let's move on, right? Aside from Mussolini, who were the other leaders of this movement? There's a person I would really like you to read. His name was Curzio Malaparte. He was an Italian fascist. He was one of the founding ideologues of the party. He wrote a very interesting book called Technique of Revolution. Just like a lot of the Italian fascists, he was a fanboy of Lenin. So instead of being a fanboy from Italy, he did the next best thing and took a train to Moscow. He went to the Soviet Union. Of course, the revolution was already over by that point, but he wanted to study it. So he went around as a journalist in St. Petersburg, Petrograd, talked to a bunch of people and wrote a book on how to do a revolution. And he wrote something very interesting. He said that both Lenin and Mussolini have a problem that they are both strategists. They think that, the working class would come out, there will be a grand battle on the streets, and we would take on the bourgeoisie. But in reality, according to Curzio Malaparte, what happened in Petrograd was that all that strategy was nonsense. Trotsky had a much better plan. And what Trotsky did was that he basically did a technical coup. What is a technical coup? So you know what a military coup is, where the army takes over power, right? Like it storms the parliament, arrests the politician and takes over power. You know that kind of coup. It's a military coup. But there is something else. It's called a technical coup. Here's how a technical coup works. And this is actually quite accurate to what Trotsky did in his. Trotsky divided his Red Army forces in gangs of less than 20 men, very zealous, very energetic, very Bolshevik, but each group was very small, just 20 people, led by an engineer or a technician who knew the stuff. And before the day the Winter Palace was stormed, these gangs of 20 men, they were running around Petrograd doing dress rehearsal. Like they would go to the electricity office and run to the top floor, then bottom, then run to the top, and then to the bottom. And the police and the officers were like, "Who are you and what are you doing?" Like, "Oh, we are just, we are looking at your public office." And these little groups of people would go to the schools and to the radio station and do this practice. And the day the storming of the Winter Palace happened, what actually happened was, in the dawn of the morning, all these little groups of people went to all the places in Petrograd, and they simply, small gangs of people, took over the radio station, took over the electricity station, took over the tram office, took over the train office, took over the school. So by the time storming of the Winter Palace happened, it was just like 10 politicians in the Winter Palace, and the whole mechanism of the state had already fallen to Trotsky's hands. Kurzio Malaparte really liked this, and he wrote a whole book over it called Technique of Revolution. And he said that this is exactly how the fascists took power in Italy as well, whatever Mussolini might think happened, because in Mussolini's brain, it was a grand revolution. But according to Curzio, it wasn't. Now, it's very interesting that Curzio Malaparte, being a convinced fascist, is, of course, appreciative of the communists in the technique, but he's like, we are better. We are like more revolutionary than the communists, right? And then in the last chapter, he starts to criticize Hitler. Basically, here is what he calls Hitler. He says Hitler is a petty bourgeois reactionary who thinks he is a fascist but is really not. And if he was a real fascist, he would have done a revolution in Germany already, but he is doing stupid things like electoral parliamentary elections. And what kind of people do electoral parliamentary stuff? Petty bourgeois people. So what is Hitler? Hitler is a petty bourgeois reactionary, two-bit nautanki who, etc., etc., etc. Kind of funny how history compares Hitler with Mussolini. And by the way, this final chapter of his book, where he calls Hitler a petty bourgeois, reformist, revisionist, this, that, he was thrown out of the fascist party because of writing this book. So yeah, it's not just you guys who call each other revisionist, petty bourgeois, this, that. Our fascist comrades also used to do the same thing. And Hitler was called a petty bourgeois reformist by a lot of people, not just the Italians. It was like a whole story at that time. So that was the first chapter, Italian fascism and how it became. Let's move on to chapter 2, National Socialism, or as you know, Nazis. So you would have already realized like this very big difference from the narrative you all are usually, fed, right? That fascism is a complete nautanki. When fascists call themselves socialists, this, that, they're lying. They're not really. If you read their books, if you ever read what they have written or what they think, they genuinely think of themselves as revolutionaries. Where they differ from us is that they completely hate three things. First, equality, the idea that humans are equal. Because in fascist logic, humans are obviously not equal. Some people do more work for the party, some people don't do any work for the party. Why should the people who do more work for the party be listening to the people who don't do any work of the party? Some people do all the labor, some people don't do all the labor. People who do all the labor should be at the top, etc. So humans are not equal. Second, democracy. This is very important. Every time Marx critiques democracy, he's critiquing democracy for not being enough democratic. In the Marxian idea of a transitionary state, workers' democracy, there will be direct control of the workers on the state, councils of workers directly controlling the state. That never happened. That's a different story. But the point is, when Marx critiques democracy, it's very different from when a fascist critiques democracy, because a fascist places democracy as the very center point of all that is weak, liberal, degenerate, etc. A third important point, materialism. Ultimately, all socialists, whether Marxists or not, are materialists. They believe that the fundamental problem of society is the unfair distribution of who controls the means of production. And if the means of production were to be controlled by the entire working class, the working class would be able to self-abolish the class system. The fascist, on the other hand, believes that there is no need to do that. The primary contradiction of the world is actually not economics. It is this idealistic notion of spiritual well-being of a nation, that a nation is a real thing, that there are certain people who have a genuine connection to the land they live on, which other people don't. And the welfare of those people who live on the land they live on is the job of the state, and hence all the classes need to be united in their servility and duty towards the state. Very different from this fascism is capitalism in decay idea that we constantly think about, because that's not how the fascists were thinking about it. Let's move on to the Germans and Mr. Petty bourgeois liberal reformer Hitler. These guys used to think that Hitler is like, weak reformist, was never do a revolution, places too much interest in elections, etc. So what happens in Germany? First of all, National Socialism as an idea is not a German idea. It predates Germany. If you have read Rosa Luxemburg, you would have where Rosa is fighting with Lenin on the question of right of nations to self-determination. Rosa calls the Polish socialists as national socialists. Basically, Lenin's whole idea was that all nations, if they want to secede, should have an right to self-determination. Rosa said that is nonsense. Some of these people who want to secede might be harmful for the working class, and hence a socialist should not automatically support an independence movement just because it is an independence movement. Sometimes it might be harmful to the working class. And one of the examples Rosa used was the country she was from, Poland. Poland at that time was a part of the Russian Empire. And the socialists in Poland wanted Poland to be independent, but Rosa did not support the socialists in Poland. Rosa and the other social democrats. Again, fun fact, nowadays communists hate social democrats, but remember, all communists are social democrats. Like, we all come from the Social Democratic Party, right? Like, it was the Social Democratic Party which broke up into the Social Democrats and the communists after the Second International. But at that point, Lenin, Rosa, they all call themselves social democrats. Like, Lenin is from the Russian Social Democratic and Labor Party, Rosa is from the German Social Democratic Party, but she's also from the Polish Social Democratic Party. And the Polish Social Democrats don't support the Polish socialists, because the Polish socialists call themselves national socialists, and they believe that socialism should not be Marxism, this whole working class taking power, rather a strong national government which controls the capitalists but does not annihilate them, and has a very strong welfare network, but is dedicated to the upliftment of the Polish race, and get rid of parasitic races like the Jews. Sounds familiar? So National Socialism actually is older idea than Hitler ji. He did not invent it. Actually, he did not invent even his own party. Fun fact, Hitler did not start the National Socialist Party. It was called actually the German Workers' Party, and a guy called Drexler started it, who was a worker, who was a locksmith. And these were like extreme right-wing people who had just come back from the war, and they believed that the Social Democrats and the Jews has backstabbed the German nation, and that is why they have lost. So the working class should unite behind the aristocracy and somehow take back power from the Social Democrats, because the Social Democrats are weak, degenerate, liberal. Okay, standard story. At some point, the army gets a bit concerned about these extreme parties, not because the army is either social democratic or liberal. No, the army is very right wing, but the army wants the gundas to be in its control. So the army calls a soldier and tells him to be a spy in this party, the German Workers' Party. And this spy's name is Adolf Hitler. Yes, I'm not making this up. Hitler was a spy in the party. Then he just joined the party because he liked it so much. So he just joined the party as a spy, but then he was like, point hai in logo ki baat mein. And then he was like, guys, I want to like be full-time member. I'm a spy, but like I like you guys. So Hitler was not the leader of the party, but Hitler insisted that they were a bit worried calling themselves socialists, because they were like, we are not left wing, we are very right wing. And Hitler was like, ha, theek hai. There is a kind of socialism which is for the German Aryan race, and we will get rid of the parasite Jews. But This socialism is not the same as the degenerate Marxist kind with its internationalism, workers' democracy, peace, love, all that nonsense. No, no, no. This socialism is like a robust welfare state, and etc. etc. I'm going to now read to you the manifesto of the Nazi party when it was formed. Uh, 25-point manifesto, much larger than the Italian fascists, because the Germans can never shut up. All right. We demand the union of Germans from the greater Germany on the basis of right to self-determination enjoyed by all people. Shuruati right to self-determination. Okay. We demand equal rights for the German people with other nations. We demand land and territory for the sustenance of our people. None but the member of the German nation can be citizens of the German state. Whoever is not a citizen of the German state is only a guest and should be treated as a guest. Foreign laws. Right to voting should be only limited to the citizens. We therefore demand that all official appointments, etc., should be of only German citizens. We demand that the state be changed, the state be charged with providing an opportunity for livelihood. It must nourish the total population of the German state. All immigration must be prevented. All non-German workers thrown out. All citizens should be equal and have equal obligations. The first obligation is productive work. Abolition of rent and all other unearned income and parasitism. Abolition of war profits. Nationalization of all businesses. Profits from wholesale trade should be shared. Large scale old age welfare, healthy middle class, end to land speculation, ityadi, ityadi, ityadi. Again, lot of social welfare, plus we are the people who belong to this land. Everybody else is a parasite, especially the Jews, and throw them out. Interestingly speaking, Hitler's line was not the only line within the Nazi party. The Nazi party even had a right wing and a left wing, and Hitler was like in the middle. Yes, this is very strange, but I will tell you about those. There was Otto Strasser, and Strasser's line was very interesting. Strasser was, after the Nazis won power, the Strasserites were, now we need to completely abolish private property, and all the property should be controlled by the state, under which is like the representative of the German people. By the way, this is not socialism. I hope you know that. Even if there is absolutely zero private property and the state controls everything, it is not socialism. If you are confused as to why, please read Marx's Critique of the Gotha program. Basically, if you have replaced the entire capitalist class, even if you have killed the entire capitalist class and replaced them by a state, even if the state is so-called representative of the working class, whatever, as long as that state gives wages to the workers and the workers are working for wages and their surplus value is being collected, it is still very much capitalism, state capitalism, but a capitalism all the same. So Strasser Sahab wanted state capitalism, complete nationalization, etc., etc. What Hitler did was basically very simple. Hitler killed all the left wing of the Nazi party. It was the Rom Putsch. Rom was the leader of the militia of the Nazis, and they were all killed. Yes. By the way, they also, everybody wanted to genocide the Jews. It's just that Hitler wanted a mixed economy. Strasser and Rom wanted a fully nationalized economy. There was a right wing of the Nazi party as well. Oh, this is very fun. So Rosenberg wrote the philosophy of the Nazi party, and there is another philosopher who is really popular among fascists. His name is Evola, Junius Evola. Evola was an Italian, Rosenberg was a German. And basically their idea was that the Nazis are wrong because the Nazis are still like industrialists, modernists, want to like have a modern economy, and all that is bad. Because if you really want to have the, you know, the perfect society with its perfect inequality, where the people with merit are at the top and the others are at the bottom, then you need to just stop all this modernism nonsense and go back to traditional society, follow the caste system. Yes, Evola openly advocated for the caste system. His book is something like, wait, I'm going to read out the title of the book because uh, it is really funny. His most popular book was called Revolt Against the Modern World, Politics, Religion, and Social Order in the Kali Yuga. I'm not making this up. So the fascists had their versions of what in India are called trads. People who believe that modernity is bad, we need to go back to tradition, we need to go back to a society where inequality is celebrated. People with higher power and merit will rise to the top. People who are not rising to the top deserve to not be at the top and deserve to be oppressed, etc., etc. And all this, yeah, they thought even they hated the fact that the Nazi party had membership for women, for example. So yeah, Nazis had their own left wing and right wing. But again, the point is that the Nazi party was not a cat's paw of German industrialists. This line is often said that the Nazis came to power and the first thing they did was privatize, and this is true. The first thing they did was privatize. But throughout the Nazis' rule, the uh, the bourgeois as a class, the capitalists as a class, was very much in control of the party. Ultimately, the fascists were a capitalist state, the Nazis were a capitalist state, but the state is what was taking decisions. The capitalist class was very much subordinated to it. I would say, though, that the classical fascists were much to the left of the Nazis within that little comparison. So I have talked about the Italians. Sorel was a French, but then Mussolini, Malaparte, Evola, then you have Hitler, Strasser, Rosenberg. A point before I go to India, and I'm going to discuss India, of course, is that why did we let this happen? Shouldn't it have been obvious that this is going to happen? What were the socialists doing at that time? This is very important because again, what is the common narratives that are within the socialist ecosystem are often very shallow and sometimes outright lies. So one of the narratives is, for example, you would have heard this phrase a lot, and I used to really repeat it when I was in college: scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. The idea being that the liberal government, or rather the social democratic government of Germany, were in cahoots with the Nazis and they were oppressing the communists. This is not true. Both the communists and the social democrats hated each other. Both would fight on the streets, kill each other's members, etc. The Sogdem started it. They started it by killing their older members. Remember, they all come from the same party, right? The original Social Democratic Party. And the Social Democrats had started the oppression by first assassinating Rosa Luxemburg, something which history would perhaps never forget, I hope at least. And they armed the right-wing militias for taking down their own estranged cousins, like the cadre of the Social Democratic Party, which split and formed the Communist Party. The Social Democratic government gave weapons to the right-wing militias for taking them down. Incredibly stupid move, by the way. But after that era, what we see is that both the Social Democrats and the Communists extremely dismissing the Nazis and thinking of each other as the primary enemy. In fact, multiple times, Thalmann, who is the leader of the Communist Party in Germany, openly states that our real enemy is capitalism, hence social democracy. These Nazis are just the puppets of capitalism. They're a flash in the pan. They are not a real political force. If you can take, in fact, Thalmann says that the Social Democrats are a bigger threat to us than the Nazis are. Similarly, the Social Democrats are like, we are the real socialists. The communists are deranged, and socialism can be only done by reformism, not revolution. And hence, the real danger to socialism is the communists, and the communists are the real danger to Germany. And these Nazis are just, a delusional mob of racists. Who cares about them? Like, yes, this was happening. In fact, this was not just happening at the Germany level. The orders from Moscow to the communists in Germany affirmed that. So Stalin came up with this theory called the social fascist theory. Because according to Stalin, anybody and everybody who was a reformer about capitalism was an opponent of communism and hence was a fascist. And hence the social democrats were also fascists. This was an incredibly stupid theory, perhaps the one of the top 3 stupid theories Stalin came up with, and I can easily give you my top 10 list. But this was extremely delusional. And yeah, so Moscow se order tha that, oh, don't worry about the Nazis. The social democrats are the real fascists, like focus on fighting them. Well, the social democrats were like, yeah, communists are the real threat, focus on fighting them. All the social democrats and all the communists would end up going to the concentration camps, but that will happen later. The truth is that the Nazis themselves never thought of themselves as subsidiaries of anybody, let alone capitalists. They had their own worldview, their own variant of capitalism, their own variant of state, and that state had no place for liberal democracy, social democratic, socialist, communist, or any other kind of democracy. So there's something important to remember. By the way, important point, when in the middle of this fratricidal violence between the social democrats and the communists, when the Nazis started doing their violence, what happened was that a lot of the lower middle class and even some section of the working class joined the Nazis. Not all. The Nazis like to pretend that all their workers are patriotic and hence member of the Nazi party. This is not true. People have measured this again and again. Even at the height of its power, the Nazi party by that point had millions of members, like 3 million or more. But the ratio of the members, still the middle class was overrepresented and the working class was underrepresented in the Nazi party. So, of course, it never happens like that, right? But still, there were a lot of defectors from both the ranks of the social democrats and the communists who joined the Nazi party because, and this is important, and interestingly, one of the few people who gets this correctly. Oh, by the way, before I get to who got it correctly, so social democrats got it wrong, the communists, or at least the Marxist Leninists, got it wrong. Even the left coms got it wrong. So remember, the Marxist Leninists did not just hated the social democrats who were to the right of them, they hated the left coms who were to the left of them. Lenin's whole stupid book, Left Communism and Infantile Disorder. The left coms were extreme economists. Like they believe that, you don't need like a transitionary state and you don't need a strong centralized power to take on capitalism. The working class is what would do it. They were completely that, in faith that the working class would, well, it is going to rise because they were as confident as the social democrats, as confident as the Bolsheviks and the Marxist Leninists that capitalism is going to fall. Remember, all these people are operating in the context of their time. The social democrats under Bernstein think that capitalism will fall. All we have to do is reform slowly towards it. Is going to fall anyway. The Bolsheviks and later the Marxist Leninists think that no, we need to do a revolution and take state power, but capitalism is going to fall. It's just like a decade or so. If we just do a bit of state capitalism under a dictatorship of the proletariat, we are going to make communism. Communism is going to happen. Similarly, the left communists who were to the left of Lenin, they also believe that we don't need a vanguard party and we don't need a strong centralized state. The working class is powerful enough to democratically seize power, and it will be able to do that because capitalism is falling and it is going to fall anyway. And when it does, the working class will rise up and take part in this communist revolution. None of them, not a single one, social democrat, Marxist Leninist, left communists, thought that capitalism's fall might not happen immediately and we might have to have other problems to deal with, like anti-Semitism and an entire political movement based on the idea of ethno-nationalism, that there is a German people. This was happening around them. The First World War happened around them, gigantic nationalist movement around them, but they were thinking that this is all superstructure, this is all culture. None of this matters because the base is what is important, and the capitalism is going to fall because we are going through a recession. Doesn't this show that capitalism is going to fall? In fact, we should have more recession, because the more recession there is, the more working class will be in pain. The more working class is in pain, the easily it will rise up. It doesn't rise up, or rather it rises up and is crushed by its internal forces, while the lower middle class, which is anxious and worried and tired of revolutions supports the Nazis, because nationalism sounds very attractive, especially when you have somebody to blame, which is the Jews. Important point here, I was going to say who got it right. Hilariously enough, the only person who got it right was Trotsky. Trotsky has a lot of wrong political takes in his life. The only thing he got correct was fascism. And he wrote this pamphlet, which I suggest you all read, What is Fascism and How to Fight It, where he correctly identifies that both the Social Democrats and the Marxist Leninists are stupid fighting each other. This is not merely capitalism in decay. We are looking perhaps at a new kind of political movement, and this political movement is extremely dangerous to socialism and needs to be fought, immediately fought. And if it is not fought, horrible things can happen. And I mean, at that time, the relationship of Trotsky with the Russian communists was extremely deteriorated. They were not really talking to each other or listening to each other. And so that analysis went out of the window. I would not say I agree completely with Trotsky's analysis, because even that analysis, I would say, has a lot of economism in it, where it primarily places fascism as capitalism in decay. And there is a lot of work after that, including Paxton's work, which shows historically that that is not completely true. Kind of true, but not completely true. But on that note, let us move on to the last story we want to talk about, and which I guess everybody wants to hear about, which is our homemade version. Where did it come from? Interestingly, it came from a very long and convoluted movement with various inputs, and I don't want to like cartoonify it, but still there are interesting aspects of it. For example, there was a gentleman, Shyamji Krishna Verma, who was a lawyer. He was an anti-colonialist and wanted to fight the British. Because he was a lawyer with money, he made an organization, not an organization, more like a dormitory or a hostel in London for young Indian law students who were actually young Indian revolutionaries. And this place was called India House. Shyamji Krishna Verma had interesting political views. He wanted India to be independent, and he thought that the British Empire was oppressive. But he also believed that, social Darwinism is correct. Some people are great, some people are not so great, and therefore inequality is an excellent thing. And Indian culture, which was very unequal, hence is a superior culture to British culture, which is more democratic. It will start to sound similar. In India House come three young men. They become good friends. These men you might have heard of. First young man is Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. Second young man is Virendranath Chattopadhyay. Third young man is MPT Acharya. MPT Acharya and Virendranath Chattopadhyay, along with their other good friend, M.N. Roy, would end up forming a small party in Tashkent later under the blessings of Lenin. That small party's name is Communist Party of India. Virendranath Chattopadhyay would later be murdered by Stalin, because Stalin had become paranoid and crazy by that point and was killing every communist he did not like. M.N. Roy would get disenchanted by his own party and would become a Gandhian. And what happened to the third guy? MPT Acharya. Oh, he also got disenchanted by his own party and became India's first anarchist and started the Indian anarchist movement. What happened to their best friend, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar? Vinayak Damodar Savarkar invents a new ideology and calls it Hindutva. These people didn't just know each other. They ate each other, spoke to each other. They lived in the same dorm. Virendranath Chattopadhyay's sister was Sarojini Naidu, who would later become a leader in Congress. Must have been an interesting family get-together. You have Savarkar, you have leader of Indian Communists, future leader of Indian Communists, future leader of Indian Anarchists, another future leader of Indian Communists, future leader of Indian Congress, and future leader of RSS or Hindu Mahasabha rather. Interesting. But anyway, where does Savarkar go different from his friends? Well, I would say something happened in Germany. Something always happens in Germany, but actually it is a little before that. And am I saying that Indian fascism or Indian communism would not have happened had some young people not been in some dorm in London. No, of course not. While these individuals have their stories, there is a gigantic anti-colonial movement happening in India, and that movement has a name. You might have heard of that name, Anushilan Samiti. Exercise conferences, literally formed out of akhadas, where young men used to meet to exercise and then be angry against the Brits, and then perhaps throw a bomb here and a bomb there. And later, a more radical faction of the Anushilan Samiti would be the Jugantar. You might have heard of Surya Sen. Part of the Anushilan Samiti becomes the Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. You might have heard of that. And unfortunately, some bit of the Anushilan Samiti also becomes Abhinav Bharat, which you might have heard of, which was the first militant organization Savarkar made before he became the head of Hindu Mahasabha. Abhinav Bharat would be those guys, allegedly, who still exist and are connected to another famous organization called Sanatan Sanstha, which you might have heard of. Colonialism and hence the anti-colonial movement was a very weird time. Ideologies were sharpening by the day, evolving by the day. For example, from a completely different story, Bhagat's favorite politician was Jawahar. Like Bhagat writes Naye Netaon ke alag alag vichar, where he praises Jawahar and condemns Subhash, because in Bhagat's time, before Bhagat is executed, it seems that the leader of the Indian Marxist movement is going to be Jawaharlal Nehru. Yes, there is a section of Marxists in the Congress that would later get diluted and form the Congress Socialist Party, then get kicked out of Congress by Nehru and form the Socialist Party, which would later form the various socialist Samajwadi parties in India, etc. But politics is complicated. Similarly, what is it that made Savarkar different? Well, first, at some point in his London experiences, Savarkar starts opposing this idea that democracy, equality, etc., are the primary goals, and that defeating the British is also a primary goal. When they are in Prussia, oh, by the way, German Hindu conspiracy, an attempt by our revolutionaries of during the First World War to get German weapons dropped into India and using them to fight off the Brits. Unfortunately, German society and German government at that time is a very reactionary and right-wing society, and some of our boys get influenced there. And Savarkar especially comes out of Germany with the idea that the Prussians have the right idea. One race should be connected to one land, and that race needs to have an ideology. And colonialism is not really that bad. We could use it to get modernized, but our problem is not with who the politicians are or who's ruling us. Our problem is which culture is the real culture of this land. And he writes a book, very badly written book called Hindutva. That is how the ideology starts. And if you want to understand Hindutva, read two books. First of all, read Hindutva, the actual book Savarkar wrote. Then read Gita Press, Making of Hindu India by Akshay Mukul, very interesting book, which goes into Kalyan, a magazine which was by Gita Press. And Gita Press represents not RSS exactly, but the traditionalist wing of Indian fascism, which is, I would say, to the right of the RSS. And there are a lot of stories which we could get into at this point. But the point is that the fundamentals of fascism, that there needs to be a centralized organization which creates a regimented mass of people, which is disciplined and fights for the people, chosen people who are attached to that state. That is exemplified, the idea of Punya Bhumi. And actually, Savarkar does not care about your religion. Like, he himself is an atheist, and I believe that he ate beef or whatever. Vivekananda certainly did. Savarkar's whole concept of Hindutva is a racial concept, that there are a certain people who are fundamentally connected to this land, and everybody else is a foreigner. And then you can copy paste whatever Hitler wrote after that, that foreigners have no ties to the land, and hence etc etc etc. So that is the end of my talk. After this we can all converse and you can ask me questions and or talk with me. But I want to like summarize the ideas fascists have about themselves. Classical fascists, national socialists, Hindutvawadis, national syndicalists, national Bolsheviks. Yes, there are these weird names: national Bolsheviks, national syndicalists, fascists who claim to be anarchists, fascists who claim to be Bolsheviks. All of these exist. All of them have one central thing, that there is a people connected with the land. How those people rule that land can change. Italian classical fascists were statists. They believed in a complete totalitarian state. The Nazis, coincidentally, were not that much statist. The Nazis believed that mass movements and mass orgs should be more important than the state. Hindutvawadis don't even have a theory of state. They don't care about the state. They believe that culture is the linchpin of power. And if you have cultural power everywhere, the state is just a secondary thing. In fact, it is very funny that while the RSS started in 1925, for the first 20 years, it did not even try anything in politics, electoral or otherwise. The Hindu Mahasabha was formed much later. No, not sorry, Hindu Mahasabha. Janasangh. Hindu Mahasabha was a separate organization, not connected to the RSS. Janasangh was formed much later when the existence of RSS came under threat because of Godse's assassination, and then they made the Janasangh. But it was a much later decision and has never been the primary motive of the RSS. They don't really care about electoral power. So the form of the power changes, but what is important is a people with a land. All fascists hence have believed in community, heroism of that community, like the community needing to do heroic actions to make itself a better community, rejuvenation of heroic action, heroism through war, and hence what is often called a revolution of the right wing, revolution from the right, not a reform, not a reaction, but a revolution from the right. Economically, most fascists support a corporatist model. A corporatist model is a model which is state supervising the relations between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie through force if necessary, but through discussions if possible. In fact, you can imagine a completely democratic, peaceful fascist state where this corporate model is working peacefully without sort of firing squads and all. And there have been states which don't consider themselves fascist, but there have been states which are actually corporatist in the sense that the state is above the capitalist class and above the working class and tries to supervise the relationship between the working class and the capitalist class. Any state where there is only one legal trade union is by definition a corporatist state, because to be a member of the trade union, you have to take permission of the state. So there are many such states, and I'm not calling these states fascist, but they fulfill the definition of fascism. So you can think about those states. Third point, being supportive of a single ethnicity on a land, or a single race, or a single culture, or a single religion on a land, fascists are of course opposed to pacifism or tolerance. Fascists are also opposed completely to materialism, because they believe again that there is the spiritual relation of a people with the land. So they're opposed to Marx completely and utterly. Fascists are opposed to liberal capitalism, because democracy is cringe, social democracy and communism, but their antagonisms are not the same, and they can and often do form opportunistic alliances with big capitalists. Often among the left, it is said that the senior partner in this alliance is the big capitalists, but historically often the senior partner has been the fascist party. All fascists advocate an inherent inequality of human beings, whether it is the Nazi style quote unquote science based inequality, or rather pseudoscience based inequality, or it is the Italian fascist style, those who will work more will automatically get more money, and hence some pseudo economy based inequality, or whether it's the trad version of some culture, religion, mystical inequality, it doesn't matter. But all fascists believe that society is inherently equal and unequal, and that's a good thing. All fascists thus advocate for a select group of humans, and that select group of humans have the first right to the land. Their glory must be protected, their degeneracy must be opposed. Here I must say that Indian fascism is not limited to Hindutva. There are many other fascist movements in India. And there is act, and of course they're not as successful or famous because one, but there is one really famous fascist movement in India. It's utterly fascist. It fulfills all these self declarations fascists have for themselves, and it is the Assam civil society movement. The Assamese civil society is a completely fascist society. Has always been a fascist society because it believes that there is a land, and this land is a holy land belonging to a certain language, and people who speak other languages are outsiders and should be put in concentration camps, but should be opposed, militantly opposed if necessary. And there is an authentic, whenever you get this logic of an authentic people who should live in a land, that is the foundational pillar of how fascists think. Ethno-nationalism. Ethno-national, if you take out every other concept from fascism, what remains is ethno-nationalism. And the Assamese civil movement is not the only ethno-nationalist movement in India. There are others. Many exist. And many of them posture themselves as progressive movement, but every single one of them is fascist at the core. Even the ones who call themselves progressive. But the Assamese one is the most successful one in India. And finally, these are the things fascists believe about themselves. And hence, we as socialists should recognize that fascists are completely delusional, that there is no, authentic people or culture or religion which authentically belongs to a land, that corporatism is a stupid idea, that basic uh, economic analysis show that class conflict cannot be just wished away with a strong state, that all of these ideas are fundamentally delusional. More importantly, they are fundamentally anti-equality and anti-democracy at their foundation. They are barbaric, and hence it is the duty of every socialist to combat fascism. Fascism is more than capitalism in decay. It is a false vitality which wants to thumb its nose at material history. It is the enemy of history itself. So combat fascism. That is where I would end my talk. There is a list of books I have referenced. Essay on the Inequality of Human Races by Arthur de Gobineau, one of the earlier texts which a lot of fascists refer. Georges Sorel's criticism of Marxism from his essays in Socialism and Philosophy. Manifesto of the Italian Fascist, I read that out to you. Doctrine of Fascism by Mussolini. Technique of Revolution by Curzio Malaparte. Gemlich Letter by Hitler. 25-point program of the Nazi Party. Hindutva by V.D. Savarkar. And Gita Press and the Making of Hindu India. Thank you. I would happily take questions, comments.
Thanks a lot, Anupam. That was insightful talk. This is Surya, by the way, the one who invited you. So, since you pointed towards the proximity that some sections of even socialists, even those in the left, share with fascism, do you agree with these categorizations such as social fascist or semi-fascist? And
I don't agree with social fascism. It's a completely incorrect theory.
so you'd go with a Trotskyist approach.
No, I don't think Trotsky is completely correct either, but he's light years ahead of Marxist-Leninists when it comes to an analysis of fact.
So the category itself you would reject?
Yes, I reject the category completely and without question.
All right. Another question is, you spoke about fascism in their own terms, how they describe themselves. We also have certain ways in the left tradition to understand fascism. And so where do we place this fascism, the self-understanding of fascists in our ontology and epistemology of our approach to fascism? Because in their own words, as you said, many of them are quite committed to some delusional revolution that they might believe in. And however, many of us can recognize that that is probably never going to happen. It's like how libertarians dream about that
No,
free market
it
paradise.
did happen, right? The fascists took power in Italy through a revolution. Now, you may argue that the concept of the revolution was delusional, and that the society they want can't happen, and eventually would degenerate back to a badly governed capitalist society, and an illiberal, undemocratic capitalist society, which I would agree with, that they are delusional. But it would not do to say that, they can't do the things they plan to do. Of course they are doing the things they plan to do, right? But if you really want to understand fascists within a communist analysis, the best person to read is Gramsci, because Gramsci was a politician in the Italian parliament when Mussolini was there. Gramsci and Mussolini come out of the same movement. In fact, they have debates in the parliament. Like when the fascists first come into power, they go around doing violence to prevent, liberal socialists, etc., to do anything. And Gramsci complains in the parliament that what are you doing? It's violence. And Mussolini says, but you guys would do the same if you were in power. Like Lenin is doing that in Petrograd. He is arresting all political opponents, and we are doing the same. It's called revolutionary violence, bro. We can do revolutionary violence. And Gramsci says, no, no, no. You guys are reactionary. Your violence is reactionary violence. When we would do the violence, it's revolutionary violence. And this debate is very funny because obviously, like, it's a stupid argument to make that no, your violence is bad, my violence is good. And then, of course, Gramsci is thrown into jail. But after he's thrown into jail, Gramsci starts to think. And the first question Gramsci asks himself, where did we go wrong? If capitalism was going to fall, if the working class was going to rise in triumph, if the communist movement was an inevitability as we all were thinking it were, where did we go wrong? And Gramsci, in a sense, starts to engage seriously with the idea of the superstructure, with the idea of culture, with those ideas which fascists take as their primary ideas. And Gramsci comes to this very interesting conclusion that we have been incorrectly understanding a lot of Marx, that Marx himself was not the sort of economic determinist which us as in Gramsci and his friends, Marxist-Leninists, are. And Gramsci points out to a lot of places where that kind of economic deterministic thinking, they have completely ignored the concept of hegemony, which is what fascists have lashed onto. And then Gramsci gives the reasoning on how communists can think about hegemony. In the Indian context, a similar piece would be by this. I'm going to give you guys this piece, Javed Alam. Give me a second. I'm going to read out the name of that piece because I think that is also pretty important. State and Making of Communist Politics in India, 1947 to 1957, where Javed Alam basically makes the claim, he's also a communist, by the way, he makes the claim that Indian communists, being a product of the anti-colonial movement, never really thought beyond acquiring state power, and hence never thought about hegemony, and hence have never fought the battle for hegemony, which is why organic Indian culture, like the culture of India, the ground culture of India, would always support fascism and reactionaries. It would not support communists, who it will think of as an outside interloping force, because we have never even tried to fight the battle for, like, Gramsci uses this phrase, battle of position versus battle of maneuver. And I think that is very useful for communists to read about, because then you get into how, like, again, you can't fight fascism by just fighting fascist propaganda, right? Because first of all, they have so much money and so much propaganda, so it might be overwhelming. But remember that the fight for hegemony is more sophisticated, and you can figure out a better way on how to take on that hegemony and how to defeat it. And people have thought about that. Also, to a large degree, one of the reasons I'm so attracted to D.D. Kaushambi's writing, and we named our reading circle after Kaushambi, is because Kaushambi also thinking on those lines. Kaushambi wrote a lot about caste because Kaushambi realized that the Indian communists sort of ignorance of caste and sort of dismissing caste as a cultural thing is completely incorrect, and caste needs to be materially analyzed, because this fundamental inequality has created a hegemony in Indian society which has its own logic, and unless you defeat that logic, you will never be able to, like, build socialist solidarities, etc. So Kaushambi has a lot of work where he actually critiques CPI's ideologues at that time, people like Shripad Dange, who went as was later kicked out of the CPI because he went so right wing that he was saying stuff like that, ancient Indian Hindu culture was like egalitarian or something. And Koshambi destroyed him in a book because Koshambi was also a historian, and Koshambi was not a part of the party, so he opposed the party line on many things. But this was one of his biggest oppositions, where he said that the party has sort of completely ignored these things which are very fundamental to understanding society. And if you want to like understand fascists in your own communist epistemology, trying to understand why the superstructure matters, or that the base superstructure model is an obsolete model, and basically it's the same reality with which has material consequences. Understanding that is, I think, very important.
All right, thanks for that detailed clarification. You talked about anti-democracy interpreted in a very wrong way than what Marx presented it, and a lot of people oppose democracy in a completely non-Marxist way, which is also can be found in the roots of fascism. So, how would you categorize the anti-democracy in people such as Bordiga in the left?
I disagree with Bodiga. So Bodiga comes from a long line of left communists, and not all left communists, by the way, agree with Bodiga. I'm not a left communist, but I know that, for example, uh, uh, you know, left communists from Holland or Germany or France, they don't agree with Bodiga. So Bodiga's idea is that while he opposed Marxism Leninism, that the party should be centralized and have this leader, um, democratic centralism carried to an like a ridiculous caricaturist extent, Bodiga also opposed electoralism within the party. He believed that since uh, communism is almost a perfect science or a way of analysis, the party should not uh, have electoral mechanisms inside, and should come to conclusions through rigorous analysis, and the whole party should support that conclusion. And he believed that the entire society should work on that model. I first of all believe that coming to perfect materialist conclusions is impossible, that you can't like, which is why I also don't agree with democratic centralism as a model, that you can't actually know that the one solution you have come to is correct. You could have multiple routes, one of which would be correct, but you might have to experiment with multiple routes at a time, along with taking democratic feedback. So disagree with Bodiga, with due respect given his stature. His model of running either a communist party or a state simply is not going to work. Like, I can't even imagine a room full of 20 people which can work without any disagreement ever, by coming to ruthlessly correct conclusions through analysis every single time. Let alone, like, I run a study circle, not a party, just a study circle, Koshambi, and we have extremely convoluted democratic mechanisms because those are necessary, not because of any fondness for democracy. Frankly speaking, I don't think of democracy in some utopian virtue manner, but just like Karl Marx, I believe democracy to be the most effective manner for the working class to organize itself pragmatically.
All right. You mentioned that you reject categories like social fascist. Could you give a little more clarity on how you see Dimitrov's theory, Dimitrov's
Uh,
thesis on fascism?
okay, Dimitrov, actually, okay, let me look at the whole line of the Comintern on fascism, right? Comintern's line at that time was, it had a few priors, and one of the priors was that capitalism is going to collapse, and people who are in essence uh, prolonging its death throes are the primary contradiction, that those people are the enemy of the working class. This is both wrong from an economic history point of view, but it is also wrong, like, you don't have to have future knowledge, or knowledge of, how should I say, uh, hindsight to come to this conclusion. It at that point, if you had the knowledge of where European capitalism was going, or how imperialism was morphing, it was quite evident that capitalism was nowhere close to collapse. What happened after the Great Recession was very strong, and it led to a lot of political movements. But given the numbers we had at that time, like I'm not even saying that from now we look back and say that the Soviets were wrong on this, but even by the social structures of that time, the economic numbers of that time, and given the fact that a majority of the German working class, not just the German working class, the European working class, was in a sense behind the various social democratic parties at that time. The whole categorization of social fascist absolutely makes no sense. Like the category itself does not make sense to me, given the reality of proletarian support, the concrete locuses of power in Europe at that time. The social democratic movement, far from being a pseudo fascist movement, opportunistically extending the death throes of capitalism, was a genuinely uh, you know like it was not a cat's paw either. It was a very genuine reformist movement, which within its own logic and within the logic of the concrete reality they inhabited in, believed that they, whatever they believed, that they might have been wrong or right, but they were definitely not creating some kind of society which was analogous with fascist society. So so disagree with the comment line on this, and in general with the idea of social fascism.
Okay, somebody has asked if you could clarify how you see the relationship between base and superstructure.
Okay, so my thoughts on this are a bit half-baked, because I uh, don't think that there is like a very clear distinction between the base and superstructure. But starting, if you take Gramsci as the starting point, right, the difference between Gramsci and the people who came before him was that people who came before him, a lot of them were misrepresenting Marx to say that not only is our economic relations central to how history progresses, but things which come out of those relationships in the superstructure, like culture, etc., they are in a sense passive structure. Uh, Gramsci turns it on its head and says that those things could get a life of its own, and they could start affecting material relations in their own way. My way of looking at economic and non-economic phenomenon is, for a want of a better word, dialectic. Not even that one is a primary, one is a secondary thing, but that uh, uh, economic relationships have jump started certain social and cultural relations which are so embedded and have so much potency that in many senses they become the primary contradictions in certain areas. So for example, um, eh, if you are going to, you know, like, yes, in most instances uh, you can have a very solid and material analysis of caste, for example, right? But there are symptoms of the caste system which don't make much economic sense today, or at least they are not propagated through primarily an economic logic, but they are propagated and they are oppressive, and they are very, very real and material to the people they operate on. And hence, I would go even further than Gramsci, and I would say that uh, base and superstructure are not two completely separate things, uh, but basically one thing which is a bunch of very complicated relationships between economic relations and other social relations.
Somebody had asked, would you categorize demands for national liberation in Kashmir as fascist, or would you say that about Palestine? So they're asking that if you're saying that about Assam, what is different in Assam, and
Oh,
how is it unique?
the difference in Assam is that the Assamese movement, the original movement and its variants and subvariants, etc., they were not. Their prime concern has been and always is this identity, or rather this uh, ahistorical identity. By the way, this identity is not real, but that goes for every single ethnic identity ever. But a connection between a certain ethnic identity to a land. When we talk of Kashmir, or when we talk of Palestine, or when we talk of any area under occupation. We are talking in very material terms, or that occupation is bad, and that um, no good for the working class can happen inside an occupation, because normal economic or normal history can't operate within an occupation. And also that people should have a right to self-governance if they so desire. What is different in Assam is that the desire is not merely for self-governance, the desire is for expropriation of an imagined other from their land, taking away their uh, existence through force if necessary, and making them a second category of people. So it's completely different.
All right. That these are all the questions that we've had. We've had a few comments from some of our comrades. I'll read out the comments. One of them says the capitalism in decay being referred to as decay of pre-monopoly capitalism. The work of Lenin on imperialism identifies what it was decaying into. Lenin stated how the decay of capitalism would bring revolutionary situations, but not necessarily revolutions. Why would you say that this contradicts Marxist Leninists have contradicted Lenin, and where is that contradiction?
So
And
first of all,
yeah.
okay, this would go into details of like this wouldn't like really go into this would go a bit far away. But for example, um, this goes into Lenin's theory of imperialism as well. So when Lenin was talking of decay, he also meant that a final stage of capitalism have been achieved. Now there is a bit of controversy here. Imperialism as the final state of capitalism, or highest state of capitalism, people have claimed that this is a mistranslation, and it should be translated more like imperialism as the current state of capitalism, etc. And there is a lot of jhamela here, which I'm not going to go into because I have my differences with Lenin here. But the main point is that, and it's not a theoretical point, it's a political point, that most of the communists in Europe at that time, and not just Lenin and not just Leninists, Rosa Luxemburg, um, left coms, pretty much every single tendency of communists in Europe at that point was of the opinion that the transitionary period, the destruction of capitalism, and the very tumultuous rise of an invigorated working class was a matter of decades. If you look into the internal party communications of the Bolsheviks, for example, when they get into power, a large section of them are completely convinced that a revolution in Germany is going to happen, and is almost and is almost like a certainty. In fact, when it does not happen, that is when you see strange decisions and sort of this fear coming out of certain people. Like when you see, for example, the defeat of the Bolshevik forces outside of Warsaw, when they try to retake Poland, or for example, even the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, right? A lot of that is Lenin's initial insistence, and later I think he realizes that that's not going to happen, that a European revolution is just around the corner. So that was, and a lot of the fascist popularity at that time was because a lot of people thought that they have in a sense been bamboozled, that a lot of people are waiting for a revolutionary movement, but no such revolutionary movement happened, and all they were looking around and seeing economic despondency and very bad conditions. This is actually a factor. So in a lot of sense, that fascism was a reaction to a failed socialist moment in history. That I think is something very different from contemporary Indian fascism, where we never had such a promising historical moment where the left was ever in at a dominant position. So that I think is very interesting to analyze.
All right, we have come to the end of our discussion. Thanks a lot, Anupam, for the discussion. This was very insightful. And thanks everybody who participated. You can watch it on Facebook. The live will be recorded on Facebook. The link will be shared with all of you. Thank you very
Uh,
much.
Thank you, Surya, for inviting me. I am not very certain of how well or ill I delivered this talk, because I was trying to refer too many things, and um, there is a lot that can be said here, and of course a lot of my own ideas about this and the ideas of other people as stated by me might be incorrect. The fascism, I think, is a project under constant, it needs constant analysis and observation. I don't think any of us really understand fascism even now, and I think that there is a lot of pessimism which exists these days because of the historical moment we are in, and one of the important ways to push back against that pessimism is to fight the mystique of what fascism is. A lot of fascism is pure nonsense. That should have been obvious from today's thing. Like, a lot of how fascists think about themselves, and um, despite that mistake, despite their power in society, and I think remembering that in our analysis and in designing our counter efforts is important. So I think people should watch fascism carefully, try to study it as much as possible.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.